Hey guys, Cleo here, and today we're going over my April wrap-up. So in the month of April I've had the best reading month I've had so far this year, and that is a good thing and a bad thing because it was a struggle and I need to do even better in the month of May. But so the month of April went really well, and there are two books that I'm not going to talk about in this one because those two books I read for the BookTube prize, and you will get my full thoughts on them when this round of the BookTube prize ends, so you will get my full thoughts in a vlog in June somewhere. But so, as always, there will be 3 numbers on the screen. There will be my full TBR on top. At the beginning of the month that number was 23. Then there will be my credit system, which at the beginning of the month was 17, I want to say. Credits at start were 12, maybe I ended at 17, maybe that's where the confusion comes from. And then the total amount of books that I read, I'm going to start it off with 2. As I mentioned, there are 2 books that I read that you won't get my thoughts on. These are Khalil by Yasmina Khadra and The Membranes by Chi Tawi. But so, without further ado, let's dive into the other books that I read throughout the month. I'm gonna try and keep everything pretty brief over here because I read quite a lot and I don't want this wrap-up to be endless. First up, I finished Cleopatra by Alberto Ancila. This is a book translated from the Italian. This is the Dutch edition. An English edition definitely also exists. This is a non-fiction book all about Cleopatra. It basically highlights 20 years in her life, 20 years in which her life and the sort of like fate of Rome coincided. The story kind of sets off with a pretty long like zoom in on the assassination of Julius Caesar. I thought this one was very interesting, and I thought the writing style really worked very well because in this one Alberto Ancila really knows how to set a scene. He's very much transporting us into the minds of the people living there, very much, you know, not just talking about the events that take place, but when the events are taking place, also really setting the scene and talking about the environment that they're inhabiting, the way that it looked back then, the way that it looks now, and you know, anything that you need to know to really get a full grasp of the situation and a full grasp of circumstances surrounding them. So I thought it was really interesting, and I would highly recommend in case you're interested in the figure of Cleopatra or in that particular time period. What I should also indicate is that for this month I was participating in the Magical Readathon. Basically I was participating in 2 readathons, the Magical Readathon and Realmathon, but I'm basically gonna only talk about Magical Readathon. For Realmathon I was part of the sort of like Nation of Baal. This is basically a readathon in which every book you read can gain you points, or you can use it to take points away from the other teams. And so I was representing Baal, but basically I was just like, I didn't note down any of the points that a book earned me. I just went as I just basically, after I finished the book, went through the Google form and then just indicated all the problems that matched, but I never really calculated my score, so I have no idea how much I contributed to the team or not. But for Magical Readathon I will be able to give you more information. So this is a readathon in which it's basically sort of like RPG style readathon. You create a character. My character is an assassin, and so in this particular round of the readathon we are trying to, you know, go through courses that will help us gain our career or our calling. And I was trying to go for 2 callings, which is the Illusionist Rogue, basically somebody who can create illusions, so that would help my assassin self, and a Rift Architect, basically somebody who can enter portals. This is basically the identity that I put out to the public, the one that I'm willing to show, whereas my assassin side is like my hidden identity, so to speak. So the book that I just talked about, so Cleopatra, was for the class of shape-shifting, and so it was to read a book with animal claws on the cover, and so there is a vulture in the headpiece that Cleopatra has. Second book that I finished is There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job by Kikuko Tsumura. This is a book that I used because of a 5-star prediction. So it was basically a quest, so it earns me reputation points. And it was a 5-star prediction, but it didn't end up being a 5-star read. So in this one we were following our protagonist, whose name I've forgotten in the meantime. And she is basically unhappy in her career, and so she at some point decided to change careers, and what she really wants out of life is a job that basically she doesn't really get emotionally involved in, a job that won't cost her too much effort, that won't see her getting anxious about what's happening within the job and things like that. And so throughout this book she takes on 4, I believe, different jobs, and the conclusion that she comes to is that there's no such thing as an easy job. My main qualm with this one is that it was always a little bit unclear to me what her problems were with these jobs, you know, why she was deciding that this or that job wasn't for her. Mainly she was always saying like that the job wasn't as easy as she thought it had been, but it wasn't always clear to me what was motivating that opinion. Aside from that, it would just also was a little bit slower than I had anticipated. There was this sort of like air of mystery running through it that never really got resolved. And I don't necessarily need a resolution or an explanation, but it also felt like we weren't really doing anything with that. So that is just part of the reasons why this one didn't end up working as much for me as I had hoped it was. This is also my oldest ARC. This is not an ARC copy, but I did have the e-ARC for this one since 2020, I believe. So I'm very happy to have finally read it and have that like responsibility behind me as well. But so yeah, I'm happy I read it, but it turned out not to be what I had expected it to be, so it was a little bit of a letdown in that sense. Next up is another book that helped me for the illusionist rogue calling, and that is The Spy by Paulo Coelho. So I read this one for the class Art of Illusion, to read a book with a trope you like, and in this case it's spies is basically the trope that I like. This is a sort of like novelization of the life of Mata Hari, who was a spy during the, like, I'm already forgetting it again. She's a spy during World War I or II? One. So she's a spy during World War I, or she was believed to be a spy during World War I. She was accused of being a spy for the Germans, and so this story will basically look at her life and give you more information. And as you can see, I've already forgotten much, but that doesn't necessarily say much about the book because I just have a horrible memory overall. I remember really enjoying this one. It was an enjoyable read. I flew through it. I enjoyed the writing style of this one. I enjoyed the way that the story was told. It was definitely a nice one because I had kind of reservations going into it because I have had problems with Paulo Coelho because I was rereading The Alchemist and didn't enjoy it as much as I previously enjoyed it because it was just like too spiritual for where I am now in my life concerning spirituality. And so this one definitely has nothing of those types of elements to it. So if that is something you don't like reading in books, then In the Spy is definitely not going to be part of the story. Mata Hari herself was a little bit of an annoying character to some extent, but I don't mind reading about those types of characters. So I definitely did enjoy it. It's not one that I like highly recommend or anything like that, but if you're interested in it, I definitely won't try to dissuade you from it. I definitely enjoyed the read. Next up, the first one that helped me in my goal to become a Rift architect, and that is The Diving Pool by Yoko Ogawa. This book went in for spells and incantation, and it was to read a short story or an essay. This is a collection of 3 short stories, 3 novellas principally, but I mean they are really short. The entire thing is under 160 pages, so I think we can call them short stories altogether. This one, it's another one that leaves me kind of lukewarm. Like, in principle, they're all stories that kind of show the darker side of love or something. That's at least what it says on the cover here. But yeah, I feel like all of these 3 short stories were, like, I was, like, the first one maybe not, but I was engaged in the second and the third one. I was really, like, interested to see how it was gonna end. It really felt like it was climbing to some sort of a big, like, conclusion, and then that didn't happen. Then the ending was just, like, unclear to me most of the times. I was just like, so wait, what actually happened now? And so yeah, it really had unsatisfactory endings to that extent. The writing, however, did definitely still compel me. As I said, it really had this sort of like drive forward, which really was a nice way to go through this one. It just didn't have that follow through, which is very sad for me. However, I have read another Yoko Ogawa, which I really loved. That was like a 5-star read, but that one was like a real novel, and so I do definitely want to continue on reading more Yoko Ogawa, trying more of her real like full-length novels before I'll try any of her other short stories again, because she does have another short story collection as well. The weird thing about this one as well is that it says that it is translated from the English, because this is a collection of 3 short stories, and the short stories definitely were originally written in Japanese, but they were never combined in a bundle in Japanese. So is that why they're saying it's translated from the English, because the bundle only exists in English? But that raises the question of whether they, I mean, it's really literally says it's translated from the English, so I'm guessing they translated from the English, but then you're going through 2 different translation steps, so your translation is even further removed from the original. So that could have also impacted my enjoyment of this one. That could also mean that you know, there's slight alterations between this text and the original because it has gone through an extra translation step basically. So don't know about that, but it is a possibility. Should also probably have clarified that The Spy was translated from Brazilian, so from Portuguese. Next up, we have the one that probably took me the longest this month, and that is The House of the Mosque by Khaled Abdullah. This is translated from Dutch. So Khaled Abdullah is an Iranian Dutch author. This one is set in Iran, and it talks about the growing radicalization, to some extent, of the population. It's very much about the conflict between the heavily religious part of society and a part of society that is more secular, that is kind of allowing more Western influences, more American influences to infiltrate society. So the secular side is represented by the Shah of the country, who has close ties with the US, and so he is seen by religious leaders as being a sort of like traitor, as being a blasphemer, because he allows these things that the Quran clearly states are, you know, not done. They are not in line with the values that the Quran is teaching people. And so throughout this story we are centering our narration around this house next to the mosque that is closely connected to the mosque. For generations now, the people in this mosque have provided the imams for the mosque as well. And so this family in itself isn't a sort of like extremely religious family. They definitely are religious, but they don't have sort of like intolerant views towards people who are perhaps a little bit less practicing of the Quran. But they are then witnesses to this like growing conflict within society, and as the story progresses, this conflict grows and grows, and the differences between the two sides just become bigger and bigger. And so in the beginning it's a little bit of a slow read as a consequence, because all of the conflicts are still underneath the surface, are still very much simmering, and we're still very much being introduced to this family and to the opinions that will form later on, or that will play a bigger role later on within the story. But so as the story progresses, definitely conflicts arise, and the sort of like second half, or like final third of this novel or something, really sees a very difficult period of time in Iran unfold. The House of the Mosque is another book that I read to become a Rift Architect. It is for astronomy, which is to read a book that was top of your TBR. Basically any books on my TBR are top of my TBR. This is a book that I have tried to pick up earlier. I wanted to read it in August, so in that sense it was top of my TBR because it's the second time and I'm putting it on a TBR officially. Next up, I finished another book that was for a quest, I believe, and yeah, so this is for a quest, so it earns me reputation points. This was a quest specific to my sort of like my calling, and that was to read a book with ghost, spirit, or elemental magic. It might be a little bit of a stretch, but there is uncertainty in this book about the status of a certain character. So for a long time it kind of seems like he's just like a spirit wandering around in the house that they're currently in this book, so I'm counting it. So The House of Always is the 4th book in the Chorus of Dragons by Jen Lyons. This book does not earn me a credit, it does not help me reduce my TBR because this was a reread. Basically, if you've been following my channel for this year, then you know that I've been rereading all 4 of these in order to prepare for the release of the 5th one, Discord of Gods, in the month of, well, at the end of April. On the 28th of April is when the UK edition of this one was released. So, The House of Always, it's definitely a really good one. I really enjoy it a whole lot. It's not my favorite because my favorite is The Memory of Souls at this point in time, but definitely it's like, it's not a disappointment in any way, shape or form. It just doesn't reach the exact same height as Memory of Souls does for me. As it is a 4th in the series, I cannot really say too much about it. The entire series has a lot of queer characters, it has a whole lot of twists and turns, it's a complex, convoluted world that you are exposed to more and more as you go through the series. So in the beginning you're very much confused, but you're supposed to be confused. So if you can handle being confused and knowing that, things will get easier. I will never say that they become totally clear, definitely not on a first read probably, but things will become easier and more comprehensible as you're going through it. And if you're willing to live with confusion, then this can definitely be a great ride and the series for you. And on a reread, definitely things become even more clear. Maybe even on a 3rd read I'll finally be like, I totally understand everything that makes up this world. But so I highly recommend it, and there are a whole lot of people reading these series nowadays, and so there are a whole lot of people's opinions that you could look up if you're still doubting. Next we get to partial DNF, I guess. This is also another quest book, so also one that earns me reputation points for my character, and it was to read a translated book. All of the books except for House of Always, which I just talked about, all of the other books are translated books, so I could have used whichever one, but so I'm using Around the World in 80 Days and 5 Weeks in a Balloon by Jules Verne. This is an adventure story, a classic. It was written in the 19th century, I believe. Doesn't actually say, but in the introduction I saw some dates flying around, and yeah, here it says. So 19th century indeed. And so I really enjoyed Around the World in 80 Days. It definitely has its problematic elements. You know, if you were here for my March wrap-up, you know that I will have DNF my previous Jules Verne, which was The Mysterious Islands, for those reasons, but also because I was bored with this one. There were still some elements that made me go like, but it was a fun ride, so that completely excused, not completely excused, but that meant that, you know, I could set those things aside as being part of the time frame in which the story was written, and that, you know, I could take note of these, but still appreciate the story that was taking place around those elements. But so in this one, the problematic elements are, for example, an attack by Native Americans on American soil, and then there's also this sort of like white saviorism type of storyline running through it as well. But overall I feel like in this one the problematic elements are like less prominent than they were in the 100 pages of The Mysterious Island that I read. And aside from this, it's just a fun story about this guy who enters into this sort of like wager to travel around the world in 80 days. And while he's doing that, he's kind of pursued by the law as well, because there's this lawmaker who believes that he might have been involved in a robbery, and you know, he's kind of pursuing him around the world at the same time, and so there's a potential of him kind of ruining that wager by detaining him at some point. So I thought it was a fun one, and the whole idea of him being chased by the police at the same time really added an extra element of tension to this story. But then 5 Weeks in a Balloon, I listened to, I don't know, an hour or something of that. I just couldn't focus on it. There was just something about it that really didn't interest me. And I mean, something about it. The reason why it wasn't interesting to me is that I don't need to know how to operate a hot air balloon, okay? I would have been perfectly fine with an explanation of that as we were given if it was like a short one. But it was definitely like chapters upon end in which we were explaining in minute detail like all of these elements about hot air balloons, how they work, like the mechanisms inside, the plan that he had for making sure he would be able to travel from Eastern Africa to Western Africa, and there was just too much scientific stuff about it. Plus, there was also a lot more problematic elements here because of the fact that it was an African setting, and so the N-word definitely featured, and it definitely was clear that there was this sort of like sense of white supremacy to the narrator's perspective, and so the combination again of problematic elements and being bored made that I was like, okay, I don't really need to read this. The reason why I bought this one was for Around the World in 80 Days. So I was definitely more than happy to see, okay, I had a totally different experience between Around the World in 80 Days and 5 Weeks in a Balloon. And since I had that other experience with the Mysterious Island as well, I now know that Jules Verne is very much hit or miss with me. And so I'm happy that this book is half hit, half miss. Next up we have one that is an absolute success, like one of the best books so far that I've read this year. This is one that counts for my Rift Architect's calling, and it is for the class of Conjuration, in which I had to read a book with an element of light on the cover, and so all of these little illustrations basically are lanterns. So this is 1,000 Years of Joy and Sorrow by Ai Weiwei. Ai Weiwei is a prominent Chinese artist activist. He is probably most well known for being one of the designers of the Bird's Nest Stadium in Beijing, but he definitely has a whole lot of works that he has created that are critical of the Chinese government. Basically, this story goes into, it's a non-fiction, it's a memoir, and basically centers around the life of his father and of himself. So I think more or less the half of this will be about his father, who was a very prominent poet in China. He lived through the times before the Cultural Revolution, during the Cultural Revolution, and after. It was very interesting and heartbreaking to see how in the regime before the Communist Party was in power, he was considered to be a leftist. You know, he was too leftist for the government at that point in time, and so he was put away into this sort of like camp because of that. And then when the Communist Party came to prominence, he was seen as being too rightist, and so he was also a number of times put away, incarcerated, or, you know, sent to these work camps, where at one point one of his jobs, for example, was to clean out all of the urinals all of the time. So he was basically cleaning out shit all of his time. And so it was just heartbreaking to see this man who had this who was just following between the cracks the entire time. His views were too central, I guess, to fall in line with any of the governments that China was having around at the time. And so I didn't know that Ai Weiwei actually grew up in these sort of circumstances. He very much was living with his father when he was sent off to these types of work camps, and so he himself basically was also brought up in circumstances in which there weren't many luxuries available to him, and in which he was very much branded the son of a rightist, and as a result also was considered to be one of the enemies of the state to some extent. And that definitely grew later on in life when he started to develop his own artistry and become his own artist and activist at the same time, because he definitely didn't shy away from publicly stating his opinions about the government. And so I thought it was a really interesting book. I mainly wanted to read this because I knew that Ai Weiwei had been incarcerated for like 81 days without any sort of warrant, any type of legal procedure or anything like that. And so I wanted to know more about what's led up to that. For me, it was really interesting to read. Definitely the period of his father's time was very interesting to read. I have read another book taking place during Cultural Revolution and later on, earlier within this year, and so it was interesting to have another perspective on those events. But definitely also for me it was interesting to see the Ai Weiwei section of this, because I have seen quite a lot of his artworks, and so it was interesting to see him talk about those artworks and about the creation of them, the inspiration for them. So yeah, a really interesting read, and if you haven't been to see an Ai Weiwei exhibit and you have the opportunity, then I would definitely highly encourage you. It's modern art, so it's not for everybody, but I feel like there's huge powers to his works when you read like the explanation for what is behind them. And so then we're nearing the end of the month. The final two physical books that I have to talk about are The Leopard by Giuseppe Tommaso di Lampedusa. So this is a book that I read also for the Rift Architect's career, and so this is the class Inscription, and it was to read an intimidating read. So this one is an intimidating read because I have already seen the movie of this one. And the movie is basically sort of like really atmospherical, character-focused story. There's not a whole lot that happens. I did really enjoy the movie, but the idea of reading a book that has almost no plot to it was kind of daunting, you know. It could definitely go well, and it ended up going very well, but there was the potential for it to go the completely opposite side. But I really enjoyed the writing style within this one. I will definitely say that the first chapter was way more difficult for me to get into, as I had to recenter myself, and I'm not entirely sure that if you don't have the sort of like framework or context that I had because of having watched the movie, that it might be a totally different reading experience. I would actually encourage you to do some research into the book before you go into it. And I, in the end, also still lacked some of the context because I didn't really know too much about the historical context going into this. And the historical context is never at the forefront of this book, but it definitely has a huge impact of it. I knew enough to know that it was kind of about the sort of like loss of power of the aristocracy, but still I was kind of feeling lost at sometimes with the historical context. So basically this is around the time when Italy was more or less formed, not fully yet, but we're moving towards a united Italy, and so basically all of these smaller kingdoms and duchies and stuff like that are disappearing, and so the aristocracy as a result has to lose quite a lot of its power. There's a new king in charge that at least our protagonist doesn't really have much faith in, and so we can also see like the rise of new prominent figures who don't have an aristocracy background, and so let's call it the nouveau riche basically. And so we do see a whole lot of condemnation of like mockery of these characters who are rising to prominence because of their money and their influence that way. But so I really enjoyed the writing style, the thematics running through this one, and actually didn't struggle with this one at all, except for that first chapter. And so even though I can still say that there's almost no story taking place, I definitely enjoyed this one a whole lot, and so I'm very happy that I did read it. The final book that ended up earning me all of the study points I needed for these two callings is one that I mentioned in the beginning, and that is The Membranes by Cheats Howey, which was for the class of psionics and divination to read a book set in the future, because The Membranes is actually a sci-fi novel. But so I was done with my callings. I had like a few more days left in the year, left in the month, and so the final book that I ended up removing from my physical TBR is Your Story, My Story by Connie Palmen. This is the original Dutch, so this is translated from Dutch. It is translated pretty recently, I think, in 2021 probably. This is a story about the relationship between Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath, and so it's about the 7 years of their marriage which lead up to her suicide. This is told from the perspective of Ted Hughes, who basically in his opening paragraph already indicates that, like, you know, for readers only really know authors through their works or through the stories that they're told, and so they make up these sort of like images of the authors in their mind as a result, but they never really know the real person, and so they have come to all these conclusions about him, and he is here to kind of even the score. So Ted Hughes is very much a figure that's kind of seen as being the you know, the instigator of Sylvia Plath's suicide, as he I don't know whether he really left her or whether he cheated on her about a year before her suicide, but basically I don't know too much about it, but basically Ted Hughes is seen as the cause of her suicide, and Sylvia Plath was very much then redeemed as sort of like role model for women, role model for, you know, people who have gone through these difficult relationships. And so this book is kind of giving a more nuanced portrayal, is kind of more showing how Sylvia Plath was supposedly also a very difficult woman, a very troubled woman. She had already been in a mental institution before their marriage, and so she's kind of being shown as being this very volatile, jealous woman. But ultimately I DNF'd this one, as you can see. I DNF'd it like halfway through, and I really struggled to get halfway through. My main problem with this one is the language. It is like so literary. It is the type of book that I consider people who don't read much literary fiction and who automatically dislike literary fiction because they say it's boring. This is the type of book that I imagine they imagine when they talk about literary fiction. It's such complex, convoluted, language that is like overly flowery. There's so many words put in a line. A sentence can run for like 5 lines, which means that I like sometimes need to like go back to the beginning of the sentence, because the sentence has so many sub-sentences that you kind of lose track of where the sentence was actually going. And that type of language can work, but I still think if it works, it's more like that it's still less elaborate than this language was. But a lot of times it will not work for me, because I kind of feel like it's just there to disguise the fact that there isn't much to the story to begin with. And so the language really stood in the way of the story for me. I could not get past the language, because the language was the most prominent thing to the story for me. And as a result, I don't really know too much about what my opinion is about the way in which he portrays Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath within this story. However, yeah, I cannot even tell you what my opinion is about. Is this a vindication of Ted Hughes? Probably not. I found him to be quite unlikable as well, because he always refers to Sylvia Plath as his wife, for example, and he makes these sort of like judgments on her actions, or seems to really have like a firm grasp on who she is, or seems to consider certain things silly without really considering them from her perspective. He's very much stuck in his own perspective to some extent. So yeah, this one I basically put it down. I cannot really give a full judgment about this one because I didn't see how it ended up, but basically for me it was just too focused on the form and there was not enough focus on the contents, and the form really distracted from the contents. So that is it. With that, I have gone through my first semester to become an illusionist rogue or a rift architect. Ideally I want to become both of these. Later in the year, the second semester will take place. It will be the same callings and the same classes, I think, but you need to like read, you will have different reading prompts, and I think you might even need to read multiple books for each class to be able to become these callings. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I scored 50 reputation points, and I already got 50 for completing the novice path, and I think you get 50 as well for completing your calling. So potentially I have also elevated to a new rank within the university, but I should probably check whether you get 100 points if you do 2 callings, or whether you just get 50 for doing the semester, for example. But so yeah, that is going to be it for my wrap up for the month of April. I read 12 books in total, I believe. I mean, the stats might contradict me if I'm miscalculating, but I think I read 12 books, which is a really nice number. I read over 3,000 pages, which is also an amazing number, but the number for the month of April is, May is way higher, so I'm kind of fearing what's coming in the next month. But so yeah, at least I can be proud of what I achieved in the month of April, and let's just worry about the month of May when we're a little bit further in the month. Let's just see how things go in the beginning first. But so yeah, I really enjoyed my reading in the month of April. Let me know if any of these books sound interesting to you. This month is definitely a little bit different from most of my reading months because there's almost no fantasy in there, and that will probably be the case for the remainder of the TBR0 project, because I only have 2 more fantasies to go at this point in time. So yeah, less fantasy coming up, but once I get to 0 TBR, I'm definitely buying more fantasy, and more fantasy will be on this channel again. But so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. See you guys for the next one. Bye!